Senator Padilla.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I appreciate your patience. I was presenting in another committee up until a minute ago, and certainly appreciate the accommodation of this special order in SB 26. I wanted to start by giving the committee a little bit of background as to why I've been so involved with this issue for years. It was in the year 2006, the year that Senator Calderon and I were first running for Senate, that we learned that in Sao Paulo, Brazil, there was a prison gang that used cell phones to organize simultaneous riots in 73 prisons. And more ominously, the prisoners were directing street gangs in Sao Paulo to carry out coordinated attacks on Sao Paulo police officers in the streets. Prison inmates effectively shut down Brazil's financial capital for days. And it was later learned that the gang leaders at each of these Sao Paulo prisons had regular conference calls to coordinate these criminal activities. So I started asking our prison officials here in California if what happened in Sao Paulo could potentially happen here in California. And in fact, the CDCR confirmed that, like in Brazil, California inmates are using cell phones to communicate with other inmates in their own prisons, with inmates in other prisons, and the department has also confirmed that inmates are using phones to coordinate criminal activities in communities throughout the state of California. In 2006, the year that the Sao Paulo riots occurred, there were 261 cell phones confiscated in California prisons. Just last year, 2010, that number was nearly 11,000. It is a serious problem that is getting worse each and every year, not only in California, but throughout the country. So much so that last year, President Obama responded to the threat of inmates in federal prisons that have cell phones when he signed a ban on cell phones in federal prisons. And that measure, since this is a policy committee, federal law calls for up to a year of prison time for anyone caught smuggling a cell phone to a federal prisoner. Our California Senators Boxer and Feinstein were both supportive of the bill. In fact, Senator Feinstein was a co-sponsor of that bill. Since 2006, 43 states have taken action to tackle this problem in their state prisons. 43 states have passed some tough laws. For example, in the President's state of Illinois, if you bring in or possess a cell phone, it's considered a Class 1 felony, and you face anywhere between 4 and 15 years in prison. In Colorado, smugglers face 19 months in prison and a $100,000 fine. In Oregon, these aren't red states, folks. In Oregon, smugglers face 5 years in prison and a $125,000 fine. Inmates are punished with 120 days of disciplinary segregation, a fine, and loss of time credit. There's a consistency in these other 43 states and their response. They're taking the problem seriously and they're cracking down hard. Yet nowhere in the nation is the problem bigger than it is right here in the state of California. Yet, since 2006, we have failed to act. Last year, when I finally crafted a bill that the legislature could support, and we got it to the governor's desk, Governor Schwarzenegger vetoed that bill. I've been caught between a legislature that is very reluctant to create a new felony and the former governor who wouldn't sign a bill that was anything less than the creation of a new felony. I'm hopeful that this year will be different, among other reasons because we have a new governor who previously served as Attorney General, and as Attorney General gained a unique appreciation and understanding of the problem and the threat that cell phones in the hands of dangerous inmates present. We also have assembled a strong coalition supporting a consensus solution. That coalition includes sheriffs, police officers, district attorneys, the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, the California Coalition Against Sexual Violence, the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, Crime Victims United, and many others. The coalition is supportive of SB 26, and their numbers are growing. I wanted to also call attention to the committee's analysis that makes reference on page 9 to a 2008 Office of Inspector General report specific to the problem of cell phones in our prisons. Page 9 of your analysis. The very first recommendation from that Inspector General report is this, I'll quote, "Continue efforts to seek legislative change to make the introduction or possession of cell phones in all correctional facilities a criminal offense." The bill before you does just that. I believe that it is tough enough to make both smugglers and inmates think twice. This bill would make smuggling by anyone, a misdemeanor punishable by 6 months in jail and a $5,000 fine per device. This bill for inmates caught in possession of a cell phone, they would face up to 6 months of permanent loss of time credit, and an inmate caught using the cell phone to facilitate a crime would face a sentence enhancement of 2 to 5 years. Now, some people will suggest that $5,000 is too much of a fine, and I couldn't disagree more. First, people that are selling these phones to inmates are selling them for more than $1,000 a piece. There has to be the fiscal disincentive, the fiscal deterrent for the smuggling of cell phones into our prisons. In fact, one person who was caught a couple of years ago bragged about making $100,000 in a single year by smuggling cell phones into inmates. There has to be a strong financial deterrent. Second, this is not a typical misdemeanor offense. Cell phones in prisons have been used to facilitate murder. Smugglers are effectively arming inmates by providing them cell phones. $5,000 is not excessive. There are plenty of lesser crimes that are punished with $5,000 fines. If you haul grease in the wrong type of vehicle in California, it's a $10,000 fine. If you barricade a street to facilitate a street race, it's a $5,000 fine. Other opponents will argue that 100 days time credit loss does not match the punishment for misdemeanors. I ask you to please keep in mind that smuggled cell phones are being used to facilitate murder and to intimidate witnesses and victims. Currently, there are many crimes by inmates that result in 180 days time loss credit, including the destruction of state property during a disturbance in prison. Possessing a cell phone is just as dangerous, if not more dangerous. Some opponents to the bill would argue that inmates mostly use these cell phones for harmless activities. I invite you to ask the department. They're in the best position to characterize how these phones are being used. Have them tell you the stories about rape victims being traumatized by phone calls, by text messages, and by images, and witness intimidation. These phones are being used to orchestrate real crimes, affecting real people. Some will no doubt argue that these penalties won't be a deterrent, that they're not strong enough. I'd be happy to entertain a stronger bill. Other people will say, well, let's not create these penalties for smuggling cell phones into prison or for inmates who are caught. There's other solutions, aren't there? Like metal detectors that screen everybody entering prisons, or use technology such as managed access to control what cell phones work and which cell phones don't work. This committee in the past made that same recommendation. And at the time, I took amendments to that effect, only to watch those bills die in Appropriations Committee because of the suspense process and the budget reality that our state is facing. In the meantime, we have again seen the number of cell phones caught on an annual basis go from a couple of hundred to more than 10,000 per year. So while I'm supportive of metal detectors and a screening process, while I'm supportive of technological solutions, they're part of a longer-term comprehensive strategy that should include SB 26 to not support the legislative proposals I have by suggesting we invest in newer technology that will take time to implement is allowing the status quo to continue. Let me close these remarks by addressing a very real issue and consideration for this committee known as ROCA. Under previous chairs, this committee established the receivership overcrowding aggravation policy that we refer to as ROCA. And the idea of ROCA was to oppose bills that would exacerbate the overcrowded situation in our prisons. I argue that continuing to allow cell phones to proliferate in our prisons is in and of itself a violation of ROCA. Cell phones have become crime multipliers. We don't just suspect, we know that cell phones are being used by inmates to commit crimes both inside and outside of prisons. Allowing inmates to organize criminal activity results in more crimes in our communities, which, to begin with, leads to more victims, but also leads to more arrests, more convictions, and ultimately more inmates in our prison system. If we succeed in stemming the flow of cell phones into our prisons, we are preventing crimes. We are preventing people from becoming victims, and we are preventing additional prisoners from entering into our prison system. This past September, when he was still Attorney General, Jared Brown announced the arrest of 4 prison gang leaders, and 30 prison gang members. Several of those arrested were allegedly given orders to commit murder and other violent crimes by imprisoned gang leaders who sent them messages via cell phones. Attorney General Brown then summed it up clearly, and I want to quote for the committee today. Quote, "Incarcerated inmates are supposed to be serving their time out of circulation, but because of the introduction of cell phones, these individuals in prisons are maintaining their role, their hierarchical position in their gangs." End quote. Members, allowing an inmate to maintain their criminal role while in prison leads to more crimes and more overcrowding. This bill does not increase overcrowding. It can help decrease overcrowding by helping to sever the ties between imprisoned gang leaders and the street gangs they control. I will accept the committee amendments suggested in the analysis to include language to protect visitors who unintentionally bring a cell phone into prison. I had previously agreed to that in last year's version of the bill. I also accept the amendments to consolidate the punishments for smugglers, employees, and non-employees into one paragraph so that all smugglers are punishable by the same time in jail and fine. And I'd like to be sure that in the amendments taken today, we make 3 minor amendments committee staff and my staff have discussed to add language to ensure any crimes in the bill do not preclude prosecution of other crimes, to remove the reference to research in motion, and to removing ward from the time credit loss as wards do not receive that time credit. Also would like to add Senators Harman, Fuller, Anderson, and Walters as co-authors to the bill. But I also want to clarify to the committee that I choose to not accept the reduction of time credit loss from the 180 days to the 90 days as suggested into the analysis. 180 days of lost time is a minimally appropriate punishment for the potential violence that is facilitated by inmates with a cell phone. With that, I want to introduce some witnesses. I have with me today Terry McDonald from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, as well as Nancy O'Malley, the District Attorney of Alameda County. They will share with you their perspectives on the dangers that cell phones in our prisons are presenting to public safety.
Good morning, Senators and staff, Madam Chair, and thank you to Senator Padilla for your leadership. I'm Terry McDonald, Chief Deputy Secretary for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and in my role, I'm responsible for adult prisons and adult parole in the state of California. I cannot more eloquently or artfully report to you the problem of cell phones in our prisons, and not just in our prisons, but in our community, because it is not an exaggeration to say that an offender's access to a cell phone in prison blurs the line between street crime and prison crime. The reality of it is, and I think any law enforcement agent in the state of California will tell you, that crimes are led from prison gang members in prisons onto the streets of California, and vice versa. We have a variety of ways that we try to control crime in our prisons and reduce the amount of the way that crime bleeds into the community. And one of those ways that we use is the use of monitored telephones. Offenders currently can use the phone to call their families, their friends, their loved ones, but those phones are monitored by staff and they're recorded. So in the event that we believe criminal behavior is occurring, we can go and use that tool for investigative purposes. Offenders have now beat that system by the use of cell phones, and not simple cell phones, but complex cell phones that have access to the internet, GPS systems, the ability to terrorize victims in the community, the ability to call for murders in the community, the ability actually to call each other on yards and let them know that we're coming in to do searches. So, for example, we may want to do a mass search sweep to look for cell phones on a yard, and they start calling the other yards and say, get rid of your cell phones, so we can't find them. We had an incident on Saturday, what we call rolling riots at the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo, where a riot started on one yard and erupted on 3 yards, all within several hours. I don't have the report yet, but I would bet my professional reputation that cell phones were involved in noticing inmates of the riot yard to yard to yard. That happens prison to prison to prison. It happens prisons to communities. I represent tens of thousands of peace officers that protect this state, and they're asking for a multi-pronged approach towards dealing with cell phones in our prisons. And one of those pronged approaches is a serious and legitimate consequence for that behavior. Whether it's an employee that brings a cell phone in to offenders, or a visitor, or a contractor, or an inmate himself or herself that has a cell phone. Currently, the only consequence for an offender is a 30-day loss of behavior credit, and that 30 days is restorable. So in effect, there is no consequence for it. Same with employees or visitors. There's no crime associated with it. And so with no consequence, the behavior grows. The senator described that we had 300 cell phones 4 years ago, almost 11,000 last year. That's an enormous growth, and California is not unique. This isn't a problem unique only to us. It's in the jails, it's in federal prisons, state prisons nationally, and we need help and support to deal with that. I'll tell you that in 2010, we had 1,000 more incidents of violence in our prisons than any year previous. We have fewer inmates in our state prison in 2010 than any year previous. And I believe that part of those incidents are driven by inmates' abilities to have access to cell phones. And Mississippi was able to, they put in a managed access system in the state there, and they found by putting in the managed access system, they reduced their incidents in prison by over 50%.
That is, please.
Oh, forgive me. Managed access is a technology solution that
Okay.
doesn't enable everybody to call out. The type of crimes that are being committed, I would say 100% of our recent escapes out of fire camps and our minimum support settings are associated with a cell phone. We find that the offender had a cell phone, was able to call their family members and say, or their friends and say, come get me. They also have GPS systems, so they have maps. So they're in the middle of the forest, and they're able to tell their visitors or the people that are going to come get them where they are. Had they not had those cell phones, then they wouldn't have affected that escape. South Carolina had an incident in the use of a cell phone by a Captain Johnson. Captain Johnson was a gang investigator and a detection investigator for the state of California Department of Corrections, and he was doing an incredible job of catching cell phones and drugs. And what happened was one of the gang leaders in the prisons didn't appreciate his activities and ordered his murder from his cell phone in prison. So that offender called or texted another gang member in the community. That gang member broke into Captain Johnson's home while he was getting ready for work, and his wife laid in bed, shot him 6 times in the stomach. I can tell you that I don't want to be in a position where that occurs to one of my staff members, and I know this governing body doesn't as well. This is a serious, serious issue for the state of California. It's as serious as drugs, identity theft, child pornography. Every crime that you can think of is being propagated by cell phones in our system. And we ask for your support and guidance and leadership in addressing that. I'm available for any questions that you may have of me.
I will have a question. I don't know if we want to continue. Maybe I'll ask the question now. I want to, first of all, commend Senator Padilla for his persistence and for keeping on this extremely, extremely important topic. And I think that he has a good bill, and that I hope, believe we'll be able to move it forward. One of the most disturbing things for me, however, that the bill does not address is the breach of trust involved when guns are smuggled in by prison guards or by prison staff. And I'm glad that the bill includes in the misdemeanor offenses both guards and staff. But I would note that last year, according to the statistics my office was given by CDCR, there were 9,000, I believe, 624 cell phones confiscated. There were only 200 people up for any disciplinary action at all, and of those 200 people, only 8 people were terminated from their position. I had wondered why, and if the department would support in the future, asking the director of CDCR to seek termination of anyone employed by our correction system who takes guns in to sell to inmates, thereby jeopardizing everyone else, their colleagues working in the prison and everyone else. To me, this is not only a very egregious offense, but a breach of public trust that is quite extraordinary. I wondered.
Senator, we certainly share your concern about any employee who would bring in any type of contraband, and guns particularly.
No, cell phones. These are cell phones that were confiscated.
You mentioned yourself and said guns, Madam Chair.
Well, maybe it's the same thing, Senator Armand, but thank you. No, I'm sorry. I meant specifically cell phones, which was the subject, of this bill.
Thank you. I apologize. We take any introduction of any contraband by employees, whether it's tobacco, cell phones, weapons, alcohol,
Well,
very
cell phones.
seriously.
Let's just deal with cell phones.
So-
Cell phones, which are used to commit other crimes, as you just delineated.
Sure. If an employee is alleged to have brought in cell phones to offenders, it is a violation of public trust. It's a violation of our expectations, and those are not people that we want employed for us. So we immediately divert them away from any access to offenders. It may be that they're on administrative time off or they're placed in a non-contact area with inmates, but we take it very seriously. In our disciplinary matrix, giving contraband, dangerous contraband to offenders is considered a terminable offense. And so that is the general expectation that they be terminated.
Only 8 were.
The actual actions that are finally taken are complex, and they're driven not just by departmental regulations, but by the State Personnel Board and other government code realities. So we do not want employees working for us who are smuggling contraband into offenders, and the expectation is they're terminated. But again, Senator, there are some complex realities for each individual offense, and I'm not familiar with the 192 that weren't terminated, but they could have resigned, they could have found another employment, there could have been a variety of things that they did as we began the investigatory and disciplinary process.
Well, I hope that we will look at that in the future, because if these cell phones are being brought in primarily, it appears, by people employed by our correction system. And in addition, and this bill is a great step forward because it does specify a misdemeanor offense, and I'm assuming and hoping that a person convicted of a misdemeanor is not entitled to continue working in our correction system. But it's something that I think we need to look at in the future and recognize what a real problem it is. I did discuss this with the author, and he said he'd be interested in working on it as we move forward, and I hope CDCR would as well.
Senator, if I could, I would be remiss in not, the concept that cell phones are brought primarily in by staff, I don't know is supported necessarily by the facts. I will say that staff have been engaged and will continue to be engaged in bringing in contraband. Some staff do get compromised, but there are many, many ways that offenders bring cell phones in. They come in boxes, in trucks, in mass, like boxes like this, hidden in other items. So employees are an issue, but there's other ways that they're being introduced into our system.
I'm sure there are. We've heard the stories of the soccer balls thrown over the fence. nevertheless, we are talking with very large numbers, and I think we need to work on this problem from all directions. But
Good morning, Senator and committee. I am very happy to be here. I'm Nancy O'Malley, the District Attorney from Alameda County. And I'm also here on behalf of the California District Attorneys Association. My involvement with this bill and the basis for it is much closer to home. In 1996, I tried a case that involved a very brutal gang rape of a 15-year-old girl by 4 men. And she still has permanent damage and trauma from what happened to her when she was seriously assaulted. That was in 1996, and the ringleader of this gang was sentenced to 90 years in prison. That will just tell you how extensive the crimes were against this little girl. She was fearful, as you can imagine, to come to court, but she did. She set aside her fears, came in, testified, being cross-examined by four defense attorneys, but told what happened to her. In 2008, I received a phone call on December 27, and it was this young woman screaming hysterically on the phone to me that she had just received a phone call from the ringleader, and that he talked to her about all the things that they did to her that night, that he told her they were coming back to see her, and that they knew that she had a child, and they gave her personal information. Of course, what happened to her was she passed out, she fainted from fear, and someone was there, and then once they figured out what was going on, called me. My first question is, how is this guy out of prison when he was sentenced to so many years? And what we found out through our investigation was that he was using a cell phone. He had it for 24 hours. He paid $1,000. His people paid it to the person in prison, that guy's people. And that same cell phone was just being passed around, so you would rent it for about 24 hours. We also, in our investigation, were able to interview some of the inmates who actually are in the business of moving cell phones around, who gave us some very enlightening information about it. And imagine our horror that we found out that there was nothing we could do about it, other than to try to comfort this young woman and assure her that these men were not going to come and see her. But the problem is, what we found out is that they found out where she was. She's since married and has, as I said, a child. They found out where she was through doing Google searches. We also found out that there were judges' home addresses that were in cells for people who got them through Google searches. We also, after we advertised this issue and really beefed up our identity theft division prosecution, I got a call from a couple from Fresno who said that they were the victims of identity theft, and what they received was a phone bill for $20,000 that was used over the course of 2 days in the prison, and that $20,000 was what was rung up on that bill, no pun intended. They had a nephew who had a friend who was in prison, and they suspect that that's how it all came together. But again, there was nothing that could happen or could be done about that. I see victims all the time. We just, in the last year, prosecuted a very serious gang case that occurred in Berkeley and Oakland area. And what we found out through that prosecution was that the gang leader, who was himself in prison, was directing the gang activity that was plaguing West Oakland and North Berkeley. So this cell phone use in prison is as we all know and is documented, very extensive. The outcome to the community, the safety to all of us, and particularly the safety to victims is just horrendous. And so I urge that this bill move forward. And I know, I speak on behalf of the California District Attorney's Office to also urge you to pass this bill out.